Good day, students. I am Ms. Nampalo. I am your new English tutor for BESP English 2. Welcome to English 2. I wish you all to be hardworking, dedicated and self-driven students in this course. This presentation covers the subject content in brief and some general guidelines that I want everyone to keep in mind when preparing for the 2019 examinations. I will discuss some of the content of your study guide in order to help you prepare for the coming exams. By now, you should have a good idea what the subject is about as you have completed the assignment. You should use the study guide to prepare for the examination as well as your subject syllabus. You should pay attention to the exit learning outcomes in the index of the study guide. Pay attention to the learning outcomes of every unit of the study guide. In Unit 1, you should be able to give characteristics of successful classroom speaking. So, you should be able to identify what are the good characteristics of a successful classroom speaking. In your classroom, what will you use in order to make sure that your learners have good speaking skills? Under these characteristics, we have learners talk a lot, language is of an acceptable level, motivation is high, or participation is even. So, do your learners talk a lot in your classroom? You should be able to pick this up. Or is the language acceptable? Is the language at an acceptable level? Is the high motivation, or is the participation even, or these boys don't participate, or do the girls participate? Which one? You should be able to differentiate that. So those are the characteristics of a successful classroom speaking. What a teacher can do to solve learners' problems regarding speaking. As a teacher, how will you solve learners' problems regarding speaking? Will you use peer teaching and speaking? Discussing an issue? What is it that you will do? Sorry, let's go back to number 2. So, how will you solve problems of learners regarding speaking? How will you help them in order to be good English speakers? Number 3, we have peer teaching and speaking. How will you teach learners in a group, for example? How will peer teaching and speaking help learners in the English language? And then we have discussing an issue. How should learners in your classroom discuss a certain issue when it comes to English? And then we have debating. How should the learners debate? What should you focus on when the learners are debating? What should learners be aware of when they are debating in the classroom or anywhere else in the school environment? They should focus on the style. They should focus on the speed, the tone, and the volume or the clarity. So the style when they are debating should be very different. How should the style be? The speed, should they be fast? Should they be slow when they speak? Or what is it that they should do when they are debating? And their tone, should they use an aggressive tone? Should they use a polite tone? You should be able to differentiate all these things. And the volume, should the volume be high? Should it be low? Obviously it has to be high so that anybody else that is listening can hear to them. Clarity, How will the learners clarify through debating? How will they clarify their points of what they want to say? Unit 2. We have good storytelling techniques. What are the techniques of telling stories? As a teacher, as your class teacher, as a class teacher, which techniques will you use in order to tell stories to your classroom? How will you ensure that your learners listen attentively, or what will you do in order to make sure that your learners pick up the message or the moral from the story that you are telling? What are the ways to use? How will you use questions and manage class discussion? In other words, there are ways to use questions and manage your classroom, isn't it? Now, when it comes to these two, we have 2 points in that unit. We have questions and the management of a class discussion. So how will you use questions in order to manage a class discussion? And then we have hand puppets and speaking. What do we mean by hand puppets and speaking? Hand puppets, we know what are hand puppets, isn't it? So how will you be able to use hand puppets? How will the learners use hand puppets when they are speaking in a classroom or wherever it is? We have public speaking techniques by referring to the effective speaker. As a speaker, there are techniques that you are supposed to use when you are speaking in public, isn't it? Should your voice be excellent? How will you master your presentation in public? Should you look at the audience that you are talking to? What should you do as a public speaker? There are many activities to promote speaking. Now, what are these activities that promote speaking? There is a discussion where learners have to discuss, for example. There is information gap, there is brainstorming, there is storytelling, there are interviews, and there are also story completion. Now, all these activities will promote speaking. Learners are promoted to speak, isn't it? Through storytelling. If a learner is telling a story, for example, that way the learner is speaking English, and it's there is also an activity to promote speaking in your English classroom. There are also some ideas to keep in mind as you plan your speaking activities. So when you plan your speaking activities for your learners, you should keep in mind the content of the activity, the correcting of errors, the quantity versus quality, the conversation strategies, and also the teacher intervention. You should be able to identify the ideas to keep in mind as you plan your speaking activities. Unit 3. Unit 3 is about literature. It's about literature. For example, we have the figures of speech. Now, which ones are the figures of speech? We have simile, we have metaphor, we have personification, irony, hyperbole, and paradox. Now, what is really required of you as a student? You are supposed to you should know what it means by a metaphor. You should be able to differentiate what is a metaphor or a simile, and you should be able to give examples if you are asked to differentiate. If you are asked to define, for example, define what is a simile. You explain, for example, a simile is when you compare two things using the comparison words, for example, like or as, and then you should be able to give an example. Now, your example maybe should be my dog runs as a cheetah, for example. That is an example. You should be able to come up with your own example relating to the definition that you have provided, and you should be able to know what do these figures of speech entail. What do they mean? Also, back to the figures of speech. you might get a poem. When you get a poem, you identify the figures of speech from the poem. When you identify a simile from the poem, do not just say there's a simile in the poem, or you don't just say there's metaphor in the poem, or you don't just say there's personification in the poem. You should let the examiner know where in the poem is the personification, or which one, and you should also tell us which one is the personification from the poem. So you should quote it from the poem, and you should give me a reason why you are saying that what you have written there is personification. Unit 4, we have the importance of reading stories. So now, what are the importance of reading stories? You should be able to give me the importance of reading stories. If you say discuss, then you discuss and tell me why it is important for learners, or for learners to read stories. And then under this unit, we also have a lesson plan. Now, a lesson preparation. What should you do when you are preparing for a lesson? When you prepare for a lesson, you should make sure that your objectives are met, and you should also make sure that your competencies are tested. For example, if you are going to have a lesson on reading, what is it that you want the learners to read about? Or what exactly do you want the learners to do? Should they read and pick out information from the passage, or should they read and answer questions, or should they read and summarize the passage? What is it that you want the learners to do? Obviously, you just don't want you can't have a reading lesson where learners are just reading, and you should have a motive, you should have an objective behind why the learners are reading. All right, now students do not know what it means when it comes to the stages of a lesson plan. We have different stages under a lesson plan. We have lesson presentations, we have a presentation of subject matter, and we also have homework of the previous day, and we have monitoring of homework, basic competencies, syllabus, objectives, and topics and themes. I am going to explain to you what it means one by one, and where you should get the relevant information, and how you should use all these stages. For example, we have the date on the lesson plan. So you should have your date on your lesson plan of the date that you are presenting your lesson, for example, in your classroom. And we have the grade, maybe it's a grade 7 class, and we have the teaching aids. Now, the teaching aids, what should we include in the teaching aids? It's the materials that you are using as a teacher. Are you using a certain book? Are you using a CD? Are you using a certain audio? Or what is it that you are using? Please avoid writing that you are using the chalkboard or chalk. That one is obvious, because the chalkboard is already in the classroom. And also avoid writing there learners' books or teachers' books. That one is already there, obviously. Yeah? So do not write on your lesson plan chalkboard as your teaching resources. As a teacher, you should be able to go out there and look for different teaching materials that will help you deliver your lesson better to your learners. Also, very important, when you are coming up with a lesson plan, you should always have your syllabus. So I'm assuming you have your syllabus there with you already, because it's also you should also study it for your examination. So your syllabus will help you come up with a good lesson plan. Now, we have theme. On your lesson plan, there's a part where you have to write theme. What do we mean by a theme, and where are you going to get this theme? That theme there is not, you are not writing the reading passage. You are not writing there You are not going to write their reading passage because the lesson plan is on reading. No, the theme you are writing there should come from the syllabus. In your syllabus, it's already provided for you in your English syllabus. They are very different themes. There we have HIV and AIDS, we have ICT, we have population education, for example. There are many themes provided for you under cross-curricular issues in the syllabus. Now, for example, let's say you chose, let's say the learners are reading, isn't it? The learners are reading a passage maybe on computers. Now, what is your theme? Your theme there will be ICT, information communication technology, isn't it? Why is it so? Because the passage you have that the learners are going to read is on computers. And also we have the topic. What are we writing on the topic? On the topic we write, what is it? For example, I said that our theme is ICT, isn't it? Now, as your topic, what are you going to write on the topic? Let's say the passage is on computers, but what exactly is it about computers? Let's say it's about the advantages and disadvantages of computers. So your topic will be advantages and disadvantages of computers. So your passage, the passage that you're going to use in your classroom will determine your topic. And also your topic is determined by what? By your theme, just like I gave an example now. And then we have syllabus objectives. Where do we get the syllabus objectives? They are also in your syllabus. Where do we get the basic competencies? They are also in your syllabus. So as a teacher, before you start, you should study your syllabus and you should know what you are supposed to do, what is required of you. Also, and in the lesson plan, we have monitoring of homework, and it says the revision. Which part of this? This part is not the part where you give the homework for that lesson. It's not the part where you give the homework for that day. No, this monitoring of homework is homework from the previous day. If you have given homework yesterday, for example, you should check if the learners have done this homework. You should mark if need be. You should also give revision or do corrections with the learner for that homework that you have done before. If you marked it yesterday, then you do revision with the learners before you start with the next lesson. Also, we have consolidation. What do we do in the consolidating part? Okay, before we go to the consolidation, we have lesson presentations. What does it mean by a lesson presentation? A lesson presentation is the overall plan. For example, it is what you are going to do. What are the learners? How are you going to present your learners? Should the learners sit in groups? Are the learners going are they going to be taught? Are you going to choose somebody from? Are you going to choose people, other learners from the class to present the lesson? Are the learners going to do their works individually, or are they going to do it in groups, or what is it that you are going to do? You should state on the lesson plan that learners will sit in groups, or they will divide themselves in groups of 4 so that they can complete an assignment, or they can complete the group work together as a group, or as I do not know. So it's up to you as a teacher to present your lesson to the learners of how your lesson is going to go. So in other words, the lesson presentation is broader than presentation of subject matter. Now, what do we mean by presentation of subject matter? This includes the learners and the teachers' activities. And it also this is the stage where you teach, isn't it? The teacher, it's where you stand up and you teach the learners whatever it is that you are going to teach about. So this presentation is the most important one, and it's the one that has a lot of marks for you as a student. When you're completing your assignment and when you are completing your lesson plan under presentation of subject matter, that's where you should write, that's where you write, what the learners are going to do. Maybe the learners are going to read a passage, and then they read the questions and answer the questions, and the teacher, you as a teacher, what are you going to do? Are you going to guide the learners, or what are you going to do? What is it you should do? You should write the activities of the learners and the teacher. And then we have the production stage. This production stage tests whether the competency is met individual work. It tests whether your competency is met. Ne? As a teacher, you should be able to know that when you teach, did my learners really gain anything from this lesson? So how will you do that? How are you going to how will you know that your learners have really mastered your learners? How will you know that you have mastered your lesson? We'll come back to that one. We have spoken about the theme, the topic, the syllab objective, and the basic competencies, plus the monitoring of homework. Now we are going to move on. We have consolidation, isn't it? Consolidation, in this part, you are going to consolidate. You emphasize on the most important points of what you have taught in your lesson. In other words, consolidation is the summary of your lesson. Emphasize on the most important points of what you have taught. What is it that you want the learners to remember about your lesson? What is it that they should keep in mind? What is it that is important for them to know? So you should repeat of what you have said already, and just conclude your lesson. And then we have assessment, homework, or tasks or activities. Now what do you write under assessment? The assessment task or homework to be done by the learners. This one is the one that the learners have to do after your lesson presentation. After you have presented, after you have taught whatever it is that you are teaching, you have to assess, isn't it? Why do you have to assess? You need to know where you stand, where your learners stand. Did the learners understand your lesson? Did they understand, or did they not understand? So if you give an activity, you give homework, or you give a test, this will, and when you are done marking, this will determine whether your learners understood or not, or whether the basic competencies were met. And then we have English across the curriculum. What does this mean? English across the curriculum has to do with the content from different subjects. Let's say, for example, we spoke about ICT in the beginning, isn't it? And we spoke about the advantages and disadvantages of computers. Now, when it comes to the English across the curriculum, what will you write there? You will write that you write that you have used. If we talk about the computers, for example, the advantages and the disadvantages of computers, which knowledge from which subject, which other subject knowledge did you include in your lesson? If there is computer, for example, at the school, it means that you have used knowledge from computer studies, for example. Now, that computer study, that the fact that you use advantages and disadvantages of computers, you have already used knowledge from a subject called computer studies. Now, that is what it means by English across the curriculum. It's the content used from different areas, for example, science curriculum, social studies, environmental studies, or computer studies, for example. And then we have reflection. What does it mean by reflection? This is done after the lesson is delivered. So you ask yourself as a teacher, were the objectives met? How will you know that you have met your objectives? You go back to the assessment that you gave to your learners. This will determine if your competencies were met. If you mark your learners' tests, for example, and they didn't pass very well, and many of the learners failed this activity or test, that means that your basic competencies were not met. So you reflect, you sit down as a teacher and reflect what went wrong. The learners didn't pass the test, but you have delivered, you have taught the lesson, you were standing in front of them and you were teaching them, but they still failed the test. So as a teacher, you should sit down and reflect on that, and you should have strategies for yourself on that lesson. What are you going to do? Are you going to repeat the lesson again, or what is it that you are going to do in order to make sure that these competencies, the basic competencies you had at the beginning, are met? So these are the parts. This is what it means when you are coming up with your lesson plan. You should read through all these stages of a lesson plan, then you'll be able to come up with a good lesson plan, because I've realized that it is a problem going back to your assignments. Many of you do not know what to write under which stage. Okay, then we move on to unit 5. Then we have number 1, we have the value of giving negative feedback. It is in your study guides. What is the value? Why should you give negative feedback to your learners? You should be able to discuss this. If a question asks, for example, give the values of giving negative feedback to learners, then you should be able to discuss this. And when you are discussing, please do not try to use the same things or same words, same examples that were already used in the study guide. Be very creative. As a future teacher, you should be very creative and come up with your own examples and come up with your own words and use your own vocabulary, for example. Number 2, we have what should be kept in mind when giving learners negative feedback. What is it that you should keep in mind? There are things that you're supposed to keep in mind that there are things that you're supposed to keep in mind when giving learners negative feedback. What do I mean by this? You should be able to bear in mind that if you give this negative feedback to the learner, what effect will it have on the learner? Will it affect the learner badly, or will it affect the learner in a positive way? So you should also keep in mind the negative when giving learners negative feedback. Now, what should you do when you are in an exam room? You should make sure that you read your instructions and questions carefully. Do not attempt to answer a question if you do not understand the question. Make sure you understand the question and you should follow instructions. If it says that if you are matching, for example, if you are matching words from column A to column B and it says only write down the number and the letter, for example, you only write there 1B. If it says that as your instruction, please do not go redraw the whole column and then you match things, and because you are not asked to do that, you are only asked to write 1B because the answer for 1 is B. Maybe you are not asked to redraw or to rewrite the words the way it is in your question paper. So you should learn to follow instructions. As a teacher, you should always use practical examples where necessary to validate your answers. Use your own practical examples. Also provide sufficient answers, meaning don't write too little or too much. Also, check the marks allocated to determine the length of your answer. So the marks provided at the end of your question will determine whether you should write a two-page paragraph, you should write your answer in 2 pages, or it will determine whether you should only write 1 paragraph, or if you should only give 10 points or 20 points. That the marks will determine what you should write. Now, in conclusion, Please students, do not try to memorize everything the way it is in the study guide, the way you do it the way you have done it in your assignments. Please do not copy and paste from your assignment. Also, you should read instructions carefully. Do not answer, your answer must be complete, meaning that you should use your punctuation the way it's supposed to be in the English language. If it's a sentence, it should start with a capital letter and end with a full stop. Those are the rules in English. Also, you should write as neatly as you can. Also, again, use your own examples. If you have any questions related to the module, the English module 2, do not hesitate to contact me. My contact number is 081-610-9072. Good luck with your exams.